Welcome to the Heart of Innovation's Vascular Spotlight, a partnership between the Way to My Heart and Vascular Cures. We are highlighting a Vascular Cures Wiley Scholar Award winner who has done extensive research on how certain cells in the blood contribute to vascular graft and stent failure. Thanks to the Wiley Scholarship, he's developed several strategies to prevent this life and limb threatening problem. Plus, he's found some ways to reduce bleeding after trauma using endovascular methods. Let's welcome Dr. Bryan Tillman, who's the Director of Vascular Research at the Ohio State University School of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Tillman. Thank you.
Absolutely, not a problem.
I also want to mention that you are also a practicing vascular surgeon as well.
I am. Yeah. I think it's good to be able to do the work, the research that we do, but also to kind of see the need for some of the research in our own patient populations. I think that's very important. So.
And at what point, what was the catalyst, just to go back a little bit and give everyone a little background, what was the catalyst that led you from the cath lab to the research lab? Sure. Or have you always been doing both?
Well, that's a good question. So I've always been interested in research. I actually got, in addition to my medical degree, I actually got a PhD, which actually was in virology, which I actually don't do anymore. But bottom line is that this has been kind of a continuum for me. And then that led into doing some work in vascular tissue engineering. And now as a surgeon, I think I've had a much better sense of what the issues are. And so really that's kind of evolved into my current research area, which is in stents, and really taking the stent as most people know it and really taking it to another level, if you will. So that's kind of where my research interest has kind of progressed over the years.
Recently, I interviewed Dr. Miles Greenberg with Allucent, which is creating a very natural scaffolding, hoping to replace a stent. Just started their their preclinical trials. They think that instead of the traditional stent, a more natural method of using what's already in the blood to do something molecularly, so that it doesn't cause as much trauma to the vessel. Yeah. Have you heard of anything like that? Or what is it that you're working on that is different that you believe is going to be the breakthrough instead?
Sure. So I think that brings up a good point, which is that, people originally, when the stent came out, the questions people ask is, how can we make this equivalent to an open surgery? And when people think about success, they think about permanent. But there's some downsides to that. Stents can cause problems themselves inside blood vessels. The body was not made necessarily to have metal inside your blood vessel. And so, stents are very valuable. They've saved a lot of patients from some very big surgeries. But really, I think my take on things was there are a lot of opportunities for a stent that you could remove. And so in the case you spoke of, that would be a stent that would maybe go away over time or not be permanent. And mine is actually a removable stent. So you can put it in, use it, and then when you're done, you can take the stent out. So that's our take on things.
We've seen companies that have had biodegradable stents, which really didn't work out too well. What would make you think that actually physically removing a stent would be valuable because you're putting it in there in the first place? Do you expect the structure and the characteristics of these diseased vessels to change over time that will allow you to remove that stent?
A lot of our needs are kind of acute. And so we only need them for a limited period of time. And so it's a little different than, most people are used to hearing about stents being used for blockages in blood vessels, which you would want something permanent, or they would want it for treating an aneurysm, which you want that to be permanent. So what we're talking about is a scenario such as bleeding. And so in that case, you would want to use it to stop the bleeding emergently, but then you would want a little more dedicated repair later on, because when, the kind of injuries I'm interested in are gunshot wounds to the chest or to the abdomen. And those are not, you think about first aid, you think about hold pressure, or anyone would say hold pressure, but in the chest or the abdomen, you can't really do that because there's bones around it and a lot of your body around that. And so you can't really hold pressure on the blood vessel. And so our stents are meant to bridge between the time a patient is injured until they actually get to the hospital, and the specialists are there to actually be able to do a good repair of that area. And so that's kind of where we've taken things. The military actually views those kind of injuries as one of the potentially most treatable injuries on the battlefield, and ways to prevent death amongst soldiers.
Preventable, and that's with the newer technology, correct?
Correct. You know, they I guess when they say that, basically what it means is if we had a way to intervene on this injury, we could save a life that would have otherwise been lost.
And so where are you at in the process?
So really what we started with is taking a stent that's retrievable. Do you mind if I take a phone call? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I apologize.
No, I'll ask the question again.
Okay, sure.
So where are we at in the process?
Sure. So we basically what we did a number of years ago is actually designed a stent that you could actually deploy, but then it's always attached to a wire so that when you're done with it, you can actually retrieve it. And so we've actually done preclinical testing and tested that in a hemorrhage model and shown that it prevents blood loss, as you might expect. It protects the organs from permanent damage. It prevents paralysis, as compared to some of the other approaches to dealing with hemorrhage, which would be a balloon or a clamp. And so in doing so, we've really changed the game. So instead of having an 80% mortality for those kind of injuries, you know, you could potentially save a lot more of those patients. And so, you know, and starting off that one could envision that being used in the military. But, you know, when you think about all of the unfortunate mass shootings around the United States, the injuries are mostly brain injuries, but right after that is vascular injuries. And you can't really do much about a brain injury for the most part, but a blood vessel injury, that's a patient that you could save their life. And so really, when you look at all of those occurrences, most of the patients who died from the kind of bleeding that we're talking about now.
And this is something that would be done in a minimally invasive manner through keyhole entry.
Correct, exactly. And so really the way we designed this stent was that it could even be used in maybe a pre-hospital setting. So because really most of these patients never make it to the hospital. And there's a lot of, I don't mean to minimize it, there's a lot of mechanics that need to go into it. Who's going to deliver that? But, you know, it'd be ideal if someone in an emergency room, not a surgeon, someone in an emergency room could deliver that stent. And that, again, highlights the beauty of a retrievable stent, because they don't do this for a living. You just want them to be able to put a Band-Aid on it for a moment until you can get a vascular surgeon in. And so really what the beauty of the stent from my standpoint is that it can be delivered by someone who's not a specialist, and then that specialist can get all the equipment together to do a good repair on that. But the bottom line is you have to save it. It's like a stroke. You know, if you have a stroke, there's a short window of time you have to intervene. If someone has a heart attack, you have a short window of time to intervene. And bleeding, there's also a short window of time to intervene. And so this stent allows you to buy yourself some time.
And is that going to be used in conjunction with a balloon, I would imagine?
Yeah, so we've actually moved away from the balloon, mainly because the downside of a balloon is a balloon stops bleeding. And so if you put a balloon up, not only is there no bleeding, you're not getting blood to your organs. And really in 30 minutes, you could put someone on dialysis, you could put them in a liver failure. And most people don't realize all the blood vessels to the spinal cord come off from those blood vessels. And so people can be paralyzed. And so, you know, if you save someone's life, but they're paralyzed or on dialysis or in an ICU, you know, I guess I would ask the question, have you done them any favors? You know, if they still have all those problems after you're done. So
you're creating an artificial temporary tunnel, so it gives a medical team time, get this person in the OR, get the vessel somehow repaired, so it can work on its own, and then you remove it.
Exactly.
What do you think the timeline is in terms of, not timeline, but how long do you think that in your experience leaving this stent in is appropriate?
So obviously less is better, but you know, it depends on where someone is. You know, I think a lot of the barriers in the battlefield are how do you get a patient off of the battlefield, get them in the air or on the ground? How do you get through enemy activity? How do you get through a sandstorm and get them where they need to be? And so we designed this so that it could be left in potentially as long as it needs to be. Now, obviously, we don't want that to be days or, you know, preferably not even many hours. But if you know, this is clearly advantageous over some of the other approaches because it keeps blood going. So you've removed the rush. There's not a rush to do something as there was without this stent.
Is this procedure going to be done under fluoroscopy, or does it need fluoroscopy in order
So
to?
that's an excellent question. So fluoroscopy is a very bulky equipment.
You can't bring that out into the field and onto a campus or into the
Exactly.
battlefield now.
Exactly. Yeah. So the concept of bringing heavy equipment out in those environments is really not practical. And so we've actually been working, and it's still something that's under development, but a handheld device that you could actually track that stent as it moves through the body, so that and we've tried to make it as user friendly as possible, so it literally has a blinking light, and when the blinking light goes off, then the stent's in the right place. And so really that's where I'd like to see the technology continue to progress, is removing the need for all the equipment that goes along with it.
But your MVP, it's in the operating room under likely fluoroscopy.
Exactly. Yeah, and vascular surgeons were trained to use fluoroscopy. I mean, we rely on that every day, but we need to recognize that in certain situations like bleeding, you just don't have that luxury, and so we need to adapt.
How would you see this possible? You know, medical professionals are being trained with new skills every single day to adapt to new technology. What do you think it would take to train, let's say, a paramedic on scene at a mass shooting on the battleground to insert one of these and help prevent people from bleeding out fast until they can get to a proper facility to be treated?
Absolutely, and you know, I think you brought up some good points. The battlefield really is probably the best place to initiate use of a device like this, just because there are clearly people who are trained to deal with terrible things, and they do have the training to be able to deliver a device like this. I think the paramedics is something I'd love to see down the road. It's certainly not something that we would envision happening in the near future. Some countries have actually a physician who travels with the paramedics. In the United States, that's not the case. So again, I think you know, our goal would be that a patient, the way I see it is, a patient would come to the emergency room and could receive that therapy even if a vascular surgeon is not present. And I think that alone would be a huge step forward for us in taking a technology which currently is too complex for non-surgeons to use, so that they could deliver you know, the life-saving ability of the stent when it's needed.
I like the direction that it's going, to empower more people to take health care into their own hands and take much quicker action to save life and limb. What pieces need to come together in order to get this into you know, first use cases in hospitals?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously all stents have been around for a while, but anytime you change the design, we want to make sure that those are safe. And so, you know, things like, you know, taking those products through the Food and Drug Administration, those are some of the big steps that always pretty big hurdles to get through to be able to take a device and take that to market. And so that would be, I would say, the biggest hurdle that awaits us as far as getting approval.
Is this something you have to start fresh on with the FDA, or is there a predicate device?
That's a good point. So there's several predicate devices, but so, you know, sometimes it's up to their discretion to determine, you know, how close it is. Ours is fairly close to stents that are used today. And the good news is they're removable. You know, the FDA is worried oftentimes about how long is this going to be left in and what's going to happen to it in 20 years. Well, if it's taken out after an hour, then that's really not an issue. And so we do have the advantage in that regard, that these are not stents meant to be left in for an extended period of time.
And this is something that you foresee possibly being deployed in the military, maybe first?
Absolutely. So we've been funded by the military just because I think they value this as a high need area. And so, you know, in that regard, we think the military would have a lot of use for this. I'm excited for it even in our civilian hospitals because, 24 hours a day, hospitals are able to kind of take care of patients. But when you have a mass casualty, we've seen time and time again that hospitals get swamped. I mean, we're used to being able to deal with one or maybe two patients, but when you exceed that capacity, you don't even have enough bodies to be able to take care of the people who are injured. And so if you can, deliver a device like this and put a few of those people on the back burner, so to speak, it really empowers a facility to be able to take care of those injuries when they happen, especially when there's a number of them at once.
And final question, what is the actual timeline on this? What are some key milestones that you have already set and ready to go in the next 18 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're transitioning this. So, we always start with our proof of concept. And so that's us building it, the garage model, I call it. And so, we've built these things that they're literally every weld on the stent is done by hand. And so, what we're doing is transitioning this to modern commercial stent production. So actually cutting them with a laser. So you take a tube and cut it out. And so it's much more durable. And actually even smaller so that you cause less injury to the vessel when it's introduced. And so those are some of the big steps as we try and make everything smaller and more durable. That's a huge step towards taking a device to market.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryan Tillman. He is the Director of Vascular Research for the Ohio State School of Medicine and also a Vascular Cures Wiley Scholar. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your efforts in saving life and limb.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.